A police dog barked at a wedding cake. And what the baker confessed shocked the bride to her core. This isn't a story about a crime. This isn't about drugs or weapons or anything illegal hidden in fondant and frosting. This is a story about betrayal. The kind that happens in the dark, the kind that destroys trust from the inside out, and the kind that explodes in front of everyone you love on what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Sarah thought she knew exactly who she was marrying. She thought she understood the man standing beside her at the altar. But in the next few minutes, she would discover that the person she'd promised forever to had been living a lie. And the worst part? The evidence was literally sitting on a table in front of her the entire time. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. Sarah had been dreaming about this day since she was 7 years old. Not the specifics, not the exact shade of ivory or the particular flower arrangements, but the feeling of it. The feeling of being chosen. The feeling of standing in front of everyone who mattered and saying yes to forever with someone who loved her completely. And on this Saturday in June, that dream was finally real. The ceremony had been flawless. The church was packed with family and friends. When James saw her walking down the aisle in her grandmother's lace dress, his eyes had filled with tears. Real tears. The kind that made Sarah's heart soar because it proved he was just as emotional about this moment as she was. The vows were beautiful. James had written his own, and when he spoke about how Sarah had changed his life, how she made him want to be a better man, how he couldn't imagine a future without her, the entire congregation had been moved. Women were crying. Men were wiping their eyes. Sarah felt like the luckiest woman alive. The reception was in full swing now. The venue was stunning. A historic mansion with gardens that overlooked the city. Fairy lights were strung between the trees. The tables were decorated with white roses and gold accents. Everything was exactly as Sarah had envisioned it. She stood near the dance floor, watching James laugh with his groomsmen, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. He looked so handsome in his tailored suit, so confident, so hers. But there was something else underneath that warmth. Something she couldn't quite name. It had started a few weeks ago. Small things that didn't add up. James coming home late from work, but his shirt smelling like cologne he didn't wear. Late-night text messages that he'd quickly hide when she walked into the room. A phone call he'd taken in the bathroom with the door locked, his voice hushed and urgent. Sarah had pushed the doubts away. Cold feet before the wedding, she'd told herself. Pre-wedding jitters making her paranoid. Every couple had rough patches. Every relationship had moments where communication broke down. But standing here now, watching her new husband, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Stop it, she told herself. You're married now. You're happy. Don't ruin this with your anxiety. She forced a smile and walked toward James. He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. The gesture was tender, affectionate, exactly what a new husband should do. So why did it feel like a performance? The evening progressed. Speeches were given. Her father cried while talking about how proud he was. James's best man told embarrassing stories that made everyone laugh. The food was incredible. A 5-course dinner that the caterer had spent weeks perfecting. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "it's time for the bride and groom to cut the cake." The crowd cheered. Sarah and James made their way to the elaborately decorated table where the wedding cake stood like a monument to their love. It was 6 tiers of pure artistry. White fondant with delicate sugar flowers cascading down the sides, gold leaf accents catching the light, and a simple bride and groom figurine on top. Sarah's mother had recommended the baker, Marcus, months ago. "He's an artist," she'd said. "His cakes aren't just beautiful, they're meaningful. He puts love into every creation." Sarah had met with Marcus 3 times to design the cake. He'd been professional, attentive, asking detailed questions about her vision. He'd sketched designs. He'd talked about flavor combinations. He'd made Sarah feel like her wedding cake was the most important project he'd ever undertaken. Now, looking at the finished product, she understood why her mother had been so enthusiastic. It was breathtaking. James handed her a knife, a special cake-cutting knife with white ribbon wrapped around the handle. They posed for photos, smiling, their hands together on the knife as they prepared to make the first cut. Sarah looked out at the sea of happy faces. Her grandmother was beaming. Her best friend was filming on her phone. Her aunts and uncles were clapping and cheering. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreaming about. The moment that symbolized the beginning of her new life with James. She took a breath, squeezed James's hand, and together they began to cut into the cake. The knife slid through the fondant smoothly. They cut through the first layer, then the second. The crowd was clapping, cheering, calling out encouragement. But then, a sound cut through the celebration, a sound that didn't belong. Sirens, everyone stopped. The music cut off. The clapping died away. All eyes turned toward the entrance of the venue. A police officer walked in, his uniform crisp and official. And beside him, straining against its leash, was a German Shepherd police dog. The dog was alert, its ears forward, its body tense with purpose. Sarah's hand froze on the knife. James's arm dropped from around her waist. "What the—" James started, but his voice trailed off. The officer approached the reception area, his expression serious and professional. The dog continued to scan the room, its nose working, its dark eyes searching for something. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Her heart began to race. What is happening? Then came the moment that would change everything. The officer's boots echoed against the marble floor as he walked deeper into the reception hall. The German Shepherd moved beside him with military precision, its leash taut, its focus absolute. The dog wasn't interested in the guests or the decorations or the smell of the elaborate dinner. It was searching for something specific. Everyone watched in stunned silence. "Good evening," the officer said, his voice calm but commanding. "I apologize for the interruption. We've received a report that requires us to conduct a routine check of the premises. This should only take a few minutes, and I ask for your patience and cooperation." Sarah felt James tense beside her. She turned to look at him, searching his face for some kind of explanation. But he was staring straight ahead at the officer, his jaw clenched. "What kind of report?" Sarah's father called out from the crowd. He was always the protective one, the one who asked questions. "Nothing for you to worry about, sir," the officer replied smoothly. "Just a precautionary measure. We'll be discreet." But there was nothing discreet about a police dog in the middle of a wedding reception. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged confused glances. Some pulled out their phones, ready to document whatever was about to happen. The dog pulled forward, its handler allowing it to move freely now. The animal's nose was working overtime, processing scents, analyzing the air. It moved past the bar, past the gift table, past the dance floor. Sarah watched, her mind racing. What could possibly warrant a police check at a wedding? Was there a threat? Had someone made a threat? She thought about the hate mail she'd received. Nothing serious, just a few angry messages from people online who felt entitled to opinions about her life. But surely that wouldn't warrant a police dog at her reception. The dog moved closer to the food stations. It sniffed the appetizers. It paused at the champagne tower. But it didn't alert. It didn't show any sign of finding what it was looking for. It kept moving. James's hand found Sarah's and squeezed it. When she looked at him, he wasn't meeting her eyes. His face was pale. His breathing seemed shallow. He knows something, Sarah thought suddenly. He knows why they're here. But before she could ask him, before she could demand an explanation, the dog's body went rigid. Its ears perked up. Its tail stiffened. Its nose pointed directly at the wedding cake table. The dog pulled forward, straining against its leash, its focus laser-sharp on the 6-tiered masterpiece that Sarah and James had just begun to cut into. "Easy, boy," the officer said. But he was already moving toward the cake table, following his dog's alert. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "No," James whispered beside her. "No, no, no." "What?" Sarah turned to him, her voice sharp. "What is happening, James? What is going on?" But James didn't answer. He was staring at the cake with an expression of pure panic and despair. The officer reached the cake table. The dog was barking now, sharp, insistent barks that echoed through the silent reception hall. Every guest was frozen, watching, trying to understand what was happening. Sarah's mother stood up from her seat. Her grandmother's hand went to her mouth. Her best friend had stopped filming and was staring in confusion. "Officer," Sarah heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. "What is your dog alerting on?" The officer turned to her, and in his eyes, Sarah saw something that made her heart stop. Pity. He was looking at her with pity. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm going to need to ask you some questions about this cake. Specifically about who prepared it and who had access to it before it was delivered." Sarah's legs felt weak. She gripped the edge of the cake table to steady herself. "The baker," she heard herself say. "Marcus. He's a professional baker. He prepared it in his kitchen and delivered it this morning." The officer nodded slowly. "And is the baker here? Is he at this reception?" There was a moment of silence. Sarah looked around the room, suddenly realizing she didn't know. She'd been so focused on the ceremony, on the celebration, on James, that she hadn't thought about whether Marcus would be here. But then, a figure emerged from the kitchen. It was Marcus, the baker, the man who had created this beautiful cake with such care and attention. But he looked nothing like the professional, composed man Sarah had met with 3 times. His face was ashen, his hands were shaking visibly, his eyes were red-rimmed, as if he'd been crying. He looked like a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight, and now that weight was about to crush him completely. He walked slowly toward the cake table, toward Sarah, toward James, toward the officer and the barking dog. And when his eyes met Sarah's, she saw something in them that terrified her more than anything else that had happened in the past 5 minutes. She saw guilt. Deep, profound, soul-crushing guilt. Marcus opened his mouth to speak. His lips trembled. His voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. "I need to tell you something," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But you need to know the truth about your husband." The world seemed to stop spinning. Sarah felt James's hand slip away from hers. But the real shock wasn't what was in the cake. It was who put it there and why. Marcus's hands trembled as he stepped closer to the cake table. The police dog continued to bark, straining against its leash, its alert unwavering. The officer placed a steady hand on the animal's back, keeping it calm but focused. "What is this about?" Sarah demanded, her voice stronger now, cutting through the shock and confusion. "What are you trying to say, Marcus?" Marcus looked at her, then at James, then back at Sarah. His eyes were filled with a desperation that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I can't do this anymore," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "I can't keep lying. I can't keep pretending I don't know what's happening. And I certainly can't let you cut into that cake without knowing the truth." "The truth about what?" Sarah's father had moved closer now, standing protectively near his daughter. "What did you put in that cake?" "Nothing," Marcus said quickly, shaking his head. "Nothing illegal. Nothing dangerous. That's not what the dog is alerting on." The officer stepped forward. "Mr. Marcus, I think it's time you told us exactly what's in the cake." Marcus took a shaky breath. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the courage to speak words he'd been holding inside for far too long. "There's a letter," he said finally. "Inside the cake, hidden in the third layer." A letter. Sarah felt confusion wash over her. A letter in a wedding cake? That didn't make sense. Why would that warrant a police dog? Why would that cause such distress? Unless... What kind of letter? The officer asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "A confession," Marcus said. And when he looked at James, his expression was one of profound sadness mixed with anger. "A confession that I was forced to write. A confession about what James has been doing. About who he really is." The reception hall erupted into whispers. Sarah felt the room spin around her. She gripped the edge of the cake table harder, her knuckles turning white. "James?" She turned to her husband, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for something that would make this make sense. What is he talking about? James's face had gone completely white. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse in real time. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. "Mr. James," the officer said, his voice taking on a more official tone. "I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning. But first, I think your wife deserves to hear what's in that letter." "No," James said suddenly, his voice sharp. "No, you can't. Marcus, you had no right." "I had every right," Marcus interrupted. Now there was anger in his voice. Real, raw anger. "You threatened my family, James. You threatened my daughter. You told me if I didn't help you, if I didn't do exactly what you asked, you would make sure I never worked again. You said you had connections. You said you could ruin me." Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "James, what is he talking about?" The officer gestured to another officer who had been standing near the entrance. This officer approached the cake table carefully, pulling on latex gloves. With practiced efficiency, he began to disassemble the cake, cutting carefully through the layers, searching for the hidden letter. Sarah watched in a daze as the beautiful cake, the cake she'd spent months designing, the cake that was supposed to be a symbol of her happiness, was systematically destroyed. The third layer was carefully extracted, and there, nestled inside the fondant, was an envelope. The officer opened it carefully and pulled out several pages of handwritten text. He scanned the contents, his expression growing darker with each line he read. Jesus, he muttered under his breath. What? Sarah's voice came out as a plea. What does it say? The officer looked at her, and she saw that same pity in his eyes again. But this time, it was mixed with something else. Anger. Righteous anger on her behalf. It says, the officer began, reading from the letter, that James has been running an investment scheme, that he's been taking money from vulnerable people, elderly people mostly, and promising them returns that never materialize, that he's stolen over $2 million from his victims. The words didn't seem real. They didn't connect to the man standing beside her, the man she'd married just hours ago, the man who had cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. That's not true, James said, but his voice was hollow. He wasn't even trying to sound convincing anymore. It also says, the officer continued, that Marcus was approached by one of your victims, a woman whose mother lost her life savings to you, a woman who was desperate to expose you. And Marcus, in an act of conscience, agreed to help by hiding this letter in the cake. Sarah turned to Marcus. You did this? You deliberately. I did it because I couldn't live with myself, Marcus said, tears now streaming down his face. I did it because James threatened me into silence about what he was doing. And I did it because that woman's mother is dead. She died of a heart attack when she found out her money was gone. And James didn't even care. He just moved on to the next victim. Sarah felt the room spinning. She felt James's hand try to reach for her, and she jerked away from him as if his touch had burned her. Don't, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. Don't you dare touch me. Sarah, I can explain. James started, but the officers were already moving toward him. You have the right to remain silent, one of them began, and Sarah stopped listening. She looked down at the destroyed cake. She looked at the letter in the officer's hand. She looked at Marcus, who was sobbing with the weight of what he'd just done. And she looked at her husband, her new husband, as he was being handcuffed. The fairy lights above seemed to mock her. The white roses on the tables looked like funeral flowers now. The music that had been playing just minutes ago seemed like a cruel joke. Everything she thought she knew about James was a lie. Everything she thought about her life was a lie. And the man she promised to spend forever with was a criminal who had stolen from innocent people and destroyed lives without a second thought. But the letter contained one more revelation. One that would shake Sarah even more than discovering her husband's crimes. The reception hall had transformed from a place of celebration into something that felt more like a crime scene. The fairy lights that had seemed so magical just an hour ago now cast harsh shadows across the faces of the stunned guests. The orchestra had stopped playing. The waiters had frozen in place, unsure whether to continue serving champagne or to simply disappear. Sarah stood in the center of it all, feeling utterly alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. Her mother was on her phone, calling the family's lawyer. Her father was in a heated conversation with one of the officers, demanding to know the full extent of the financial theft. Her grandmother sat at one of the tables, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The wedding cake, or what remained of it, sat on the table like a monument to Sarah's shattered dreams. The beautiful fondant work, the delicate sugar flowers, the gold leaf accents. All of it now seemed grotesque. A beautiful lie, a perfect exterior hiding something rotten at its core. Marcus was sitting at one of the tables, his head in his hands, looking like a man who had just survived an earthquake. An officer stood nearby, taking his statement, asking questions about when James had first approached him, what exactly James had threatened, how James had forced him into silence. He said he knew people. Sarah heard Marcus tell the officer, his voice hollow. He said, if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't help him, he would make sure I was charged as an accomplice. He said he had documentation that proved I knew about his scheme. He said he had evidence of me accepting bribes. None of it was true, but I was terrified. I have a daughter. I have a family. I couldn't risk. Marcus's voice broke, and he couldn't continue. Sarah felt a strange mixture of emotions toward Marcus. Anger that he had kept this secret for so long. Gratitude that he had finally found the courage to expose James. Sympathy for the impossible position James had put him in. Victoria was still in the reception hall, sitting at a table with one of the officers, providing more detailed information about James's crimes. She kept glancing over at Sarah with an expression of deep concern. A few times, their eyes met, and Victoria would give her a small, sad smile. The smile of someone who understood exactly what Sarah was going through, because she had been through it herself. Sarah's best friend, Jennifer, was at her side now, holding her hand, not saying anything because there was nothing to say. What words could possibly comfort someone on their wedding day when they discovered that the person they'd married was a criminal who had married them for money? "We should get you out of here," Jennifer said finally, squeezing Sarah's hand. "We should take you somewhere quiet, somewhere you can process this." Sarah nodded numbly. She wanted to leave. She wanted to escape this nightmare. But she also felt frozen, unable to move, unable to do anything but stand there and watch as her entire life imploded. An officer approached her. It was the same one who had read the letter aloud, a woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. Her name tag read Officer Patricia Chen, and Sarah found herself wondering if she was related to Victoria. The coincidence seemed almost too much. "Miss Sarah," Officer Chen said gently, "I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but I need to ask you some questions. It's important for the investigation." Sarah nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." Officer Chen guided her to a quieter corner of the reception hall, away from the chaos. They sat at a small table near the window, overlooking the gardens that had seemed so beautiful just hours ago. "First," Officer Chen said, pulling out a notebook, "I need to ask you about your relationship with James. How long have you been together?" 3 years, Sarah heard herself say. The words sounded distant, as if someone else was speaking them. "We met at a charity event. He was charming, attentive. He made me feel special. And he never showed any signs of being involved in illegal activities." Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. Were there signs? Had she been willfully blind? "No," she said finally. "But now that I think about it, there were things that didn't add up. He would disappear for hours without explanation. He would get phone calls and take them in private. He was evasive about his work. But when I asked him about it, he always had an explanation. He said he was working on a big deal. He said he couldn't discuss the details because of confidentiality agreements." Officer Chen wrote this down. "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him," Sarah said, and the admission felt like a knife to her chest. "I wanted to believe that he was the person he presented himself to be." "That's understandable," Officer Chen said, and her tone was genuinely kind. People who commit fraud are often very good at deception. They've perfected the art of appearing trustworthy. It's not your fault that you believed him. But it felt like her fault. It felt like she should have known. It felt like she should have seen through the lies. It felt like she had been stupid and naive and deserving of this humiliation. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "What happens to me?" "Well," Officer Chen said carefully, "that depends on several things. First, we need to determine the full extent of James's crimes. We need to identify all of his victims. We need to recover as much of the stolen money as possible. And we need to conduct a thorough investigation into your family's involvement." Sarah's head snapped up. "My family's involvement? My family didn't know about this. My father certainly didn't." "I'm not suggesting they did," Officer Chen said quickly. "But James had access to your family's accounts. He had passwords. He had authorization codes. We need to understand how he obtained those, and whether anyone in your family's organization helped him, knowingly or unknowingly." Sarah felt sick. The idea that her family might be implicated in this, the people she worked with might have been complicit in James's crimes. It was almost too much to bear. "What about the money?" Sarah asked. "The $4.7 million. Can you get it back?" "We'll try," Officer Chen said. "We've already begun the process of freezing James's accounts and tracing the money he transferred. Some of it may be recoverable. But I won't lie to you, some of it is probably gone. He's had time to move it around, to hide it, to invest it in ways that make it difficult to trace." Sarah nodded. She felt numb. The money was important, yes, but it seemed almost insignificant compared to the violation she felt. James hadn't just stolen money from her family. He had stolen her trust. He had stolen her sense of security. He had stolen her ability to believe in people. "There's something else," Officer Chen said, and there was a note of hesitation in her voice. "Something that we discovered when we were examining James's financial records." Sarah looked up. "What?" "There are payments," Officer Chen said slowly, "being made to a woman named Eleanor Hartwell. Large payments. Over the past 18 months, James has transferred approximately $800,000 to her." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Who is Eleanor Hartwell?" Officer Chen consulted her notebook. "According to our preliminary investigation, Eleanor Hartwell is a woman who was one of James's victims. She lost $200,000 in his investment scheme. But instead of reporting him to the authorities, she appears to have cooperated with him in exchange for regular payments." "You mean she was blackmailing him?" Sarah asked, trying to understand. "Possibly," Officer Chen said. "Or possibly they came to some kind of arrangement. We're still investigating. But what's interesting is that the payment stopped 3 months ago. And that's when Eleanor Hartwell disappeared." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Disappeared? What do you mean, disappeared?" "She hasn't been seen since," Officer Chen said. "Her family reported her missing 6 weeks ago. We initially thought she might have run away, but given what we've discovered about her connection to James, we're now treating her disappearance as potentially criminal in nature." The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Criminal in nature, potentially criminal in nature. "Are you saying that James might have—" Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't even voice the possibility. "We don't know yet," Officer Chen said carefully. "But it's a line of inquiry we're pursuing. James is going to be facing charges for fraud, embezzlement, and theft. But if Eleanor Hartwell's disappearance is connected to him, there could be additional charges." Sarah felt the room spin. She had married a man who was not only a thief and a con artist, but who might also be a murderer. The man who had looked into her eyes and promised to love her forever might have killed someone. The man who had cried when he saw her in her wedding dress might be a killer. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Everyone in the reception hall turned to look at her. She felt their eyes on her, pitying, curious, horrified. She needed air. She needed to get out of this place. "I need to leave," she said to Officer Chen. "I need to go home." "Of course," Officer Chen said, standing as well. "We'll be in touch with you about further questioning. In the meantime, if you remember anything at all that might be relevant to the investigation, please contact me immediately." Officer Chen handed her a business card. Sarah took it numbly and turned away. Jennifer was at her side immediately, guiding her toward the exit. As they walked, Sarah caught sight of herself in one of the mirrors that lined the reception hall. She was still wearing her wedding dress, the beautiful, expensive dress that her mother had helped her choose, the dress that was supposed to be a symbol of the happiest day of her life. Now it just looked like a costume for a play that had turned out to be a tragedy. As Sarah left the reception hall, she didn't notice the figure watching her from the shadows. A figure who had been there the entire time. A figure who knew secrets about James that even the police didn't know yet. And those secrets were about to turn Sarah's nightmare into something far worse than she could possibly imagine. Sarah's apartment felt different now. Smaller, colder, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the shock of what had happened and were now pressing in on her from all sides. Jennifer had insisted on staying with her, and Sarah was grateful. She couldn't imagine being alone right now. Couldn't imagine sitting in the silence with nothing but her thoughts and the weight of her shattered life. It was past midnight. Sarah sat on her couch in her wedding dress. She hadn't had the energy to change out of it, with a cup of untouched tea growing cold on the coffee table in front of her. The television was on, but she wasn't watching it. She was staring at nothing, her mind replaying the events of the day over and over again. Jennifer was in the kitchen, making something to eat. Sarah could hear the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing, the clink of dishes. Normal sounds, mundane sounds. The sounds of a life that was still continuing, even though Sarah's had stopped. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She picked it up and saw a text from an unknown number. "Don't trust the police. They don't know the whole story. Call me, it's important. V." Sarah stared at the message. "V, Victoria?" She was about to respond when another text came through. "Delete these messages after you read them. James has people watching you. People who work for him. People who are dangerous." Sarah's hands began to shake. She looked around her apartment, suddenly feeling exposed. Were there cameras? Were there people outside watching her? Was she being monitored? "Jennifer," she called out, her voice higher than she intended. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, a sandwich in her hand. "What's wrong? What happened?" Sarah showed her the messages. Jennifer's face went pale. "Who is V?" "Victoria," Sarah said. "James's ex-fiancée. But why would she be texting me? How did she get my number?" "I don't know," Jennifer said, sitting down beside her. "But she's right about one thing. You should delete those messages. If the police find out you're in contact with a witness, it could complicate things." Sarah deleted the messages, her heart pounding in her chest. But even as she did, she felt a strange compulsion to call Victoria back. Victoria had helped expose James. Victoria had risked something to tell the truth. Maybe she knew something else. Maybe she knew something about Eleanor Hartwell. "I need to call her," Sarah said. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Jennifer asked. "No," Sarah admitted, "but I need to know what she wants to tell me." Sarah found Victoria's number in her recent calls and dialed. Victoria answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting. "Thank God," Victoria said immediately. "I wasn't sure you'd call back." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice low even though she knew Jennifer could hear her. "I need to meet with you," Victoria said. "In person. There's something I didn't tell the police. Something that James made me promise never to tell anyone. But now that he's been arrested, I think you need to know." "What is it?" Sarah demanded. "Not over the phone," Victoria said. "It's not safe. There's a coffee shop called The Grind on 5th and Main. Can you meet me there tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock? Sarah hesitated. Everything about this felt dangerous. Everything about this felt wrong. But she also felt a desperate need to understand what was happening. A desperate need to know the full truth about the man she'd married. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll be there." Victoria hung up without saying goodbye. Sarah set her phone down and looked at Jennifer. "I'm meeting Victoria tomorrow morning." "Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea," Jennifer said. "You should talk to the police first. You should tell them about the messages." "And say what?" Sarah asked. "That an ex-fiancé is warning me about James having people watching me? They'll think I'm paranoid. They'll think I'm not thinking clearly. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not thinking clearly. But I need to know what Victoria knows." Jennifer didn't argue further, but Sarah could see the concern in her eyes. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Sarah eventually changed out of her wedding dress, hanging it carefully in her closet as if it were a precious artifact instead of a monument to her humiliation. She took a long shower, trying to wash away the feeling of being contaminated by James's lies. She lay in bed next to Jennifer, who had insisted on staying in the room with her, and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her mind was racing with questions. What had Victoria discovered? What did James have to do with Eleanor Hartwell's disappearance? Who were these people who were supposedly watching her? At 7:30 a.m., Sarah got out of bed. She dressed carefully, jeans, a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wanted to be inconspicuous. She wanted to blend into the background. "I'm coming with you," Jennifer said, already getting dressed. "No," Sarah said. "If there are people watching me, if James really does have people following me, then I don't want you involved. I don't want to put you in danger." "Sarah, please," Sarah said. "I need to do this alone." Jennifer looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Sarah's expression must have convinced her. She nodded reluctantly. Sarah took an Uber to The Grind, spending the entire ride looking over her shoulder, checking to see if they were being followed. The driver probably thought she was crazy. Maybe she was. The coffee shop was small and relatively empty at this early hour. Victoria was already there, sitting at a table in the back corner, 2 cups of coffee in front of her. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. Sarah sat down across from her. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said. "What do you want to tell me?" Sarah asked without preamble. Victoria took a deep breath. "I need to tell you about Eleanor Hartwell. I need to tell you what really happened to her. And I need to tell you about James's real reason for marrying you." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "What do you mean, his real reason? I thought it was about my family's money." "It was," Victoria said. "But it was also about something else. Something much darker. Something that Eleanor discovered, and that's why James made her disappear." "Tell me," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to match Sarah's. James isn't just a con artist, Sarah. He's part of something much bigger, a network of people who target wealthy families. They infiltrate the families, gain their trust, and then they exploit them. But if anyone gets too close to discovering the truth, if anyone threatens to expose them, they disappear. You're saying James killed Eleanor? Hartwell, Sarah said flatly. I'm saying James was involved in her disappearance, Victoria said carefully. I'm not certain he killed her himself, but he knows who did. And I'm saying that you might be in danger too. Sarah felt the room spin around her. Why would I be in danger? I'm his wife. I'm part of his plan. That's exactly why you're in danger, Victoria said. You know too much now. You know about the investment scheme. You know about the money he stole from your family. And if you start asking questions, if you start digging deeper, they might decide you're a liability. Who is they? Sarah demanded. Who else is involved in this? I don't know all of them, Victoria admitted. But I know that James reports to someone higher up in the organization, someone with significant power and resources. I tried to find out who it was, but James was careful. He never let me get close enough to discover their identity. Sarah's mind was reeling. She had thought the worst had already happened. She had thought discovering that James was a con artist was the bottom of the pit. But now it seemed like the pit went much deeper than she'd imagined. Much darker, much more dangerous. What do I do? Sarah asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded, how helpless. You need to be careful, Victoria said. You need to watch who you trust. You need to assume that you're being monitored. And you need to be prepared to disappear if necessary. Disappear, Sarah repeated. I can't just disappear. I have a family, I have a job, I have a life. You had a life, Victoria said gently. But that life is gone now. The question is whether you're going to survive what comes next. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. Stop meeting with Victoria Chen. You're making a mistake. Jay. Sarah's blood ran cold. James. It was a message from James. But how? He was in police custody. He shouldn't have access to a phone. He shouldn't be able to contact anyone. She showed the message to Victoria, whose face went even paler than it already was. We need to leave, Victoria said urgently, standing up. We need to leave now. But it was too late. The door to the coffee shop burst open, and two men in dark suits entered. They weren't police. They weren't anyone official. They looked like the kind of men who did things that weren't supposed to be asked about. The kind of men who made people disappear. One of them looked directly at Sarah, and he smiled. Ms. Sarah, he said, his voice smooth and menacing. We need you to come with us. Sarah realized in that moment that her nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. And the real danger, the danger that had been lurking beneath the surface all along, was finally revealing itself. Sarah's instinct was to run. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to get up and flee. But she found herself frozen in her seat, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The two men in dark suits moved toward their table with deliberate slowness, as if they had all the time in the world, as if Sarah and Victoria had nowhere to go, as if escape was already impossible. Don't make this difficult, the man on the left said. He was tall, with a scarred face and cold gray eyes that seemed to look right through her. Just come with us quietly, and no one gets hurt. Victoria grabbed Sarah's arm. "Run," she hissed. Without thinking, Sarah stood up, knocking her chair backward. It clattered to the floor with a loud crash that seemed to echo through the small coffee shop. The handful of other customers, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a young woman with a laptop, a barista behind the counter, all looked up in alarm. "Help!" Sarah screamed, her voice raw and desperate. "Someone call the police!" The scarred man's expression hardened. He reached into his jacket, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Was he reaching for a gun? Was he about to shoot her in broad daylight, in front of witnesses? But before he could pull his hand out, Victoria grabbed a coffee cup from the table and threw it at him. The hot liquid splashed across his face, and he let out a curse, his hands flying up to his eyes. "Go!" Victoria shouted, pushing Sarah toward the back of the coffee shop. They ran. Sarah's legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but adrenaline propelled her forward. There was a back door near the kitchen, and Victoria was heading straight for it. The second man was moving to cut them off, but the barista, a young man with a beard and kind eyes, suddenly stepped into his path. "I don't know what's going on," the barista said, "but I'm not letting you hurt anyone in my shop." The second man didn't hesitate. He grabbed the barista by the collar and threw him against the counter. The barista cried out in pain, but he'd bought Sarah and Victoria precious seconds. They burst through the back door into an alley. The morning air hit Sarah's face like a slap, cold and shocking. Behind them, she could hear the men shouting, could hear the sound of their footsteps pounding against the concrete. "This way!" Victoria grabbed her hand and pulled her down the alley. They ran past dumpsters and stacks of cardboard boxes, their feet splashing through puddles of murky water. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps. Her heart felt like it was going to explode out of her chest. The alley opened onto a side street. Victoria didn't slow down. She pulled Sarah across the street, weaving between parked cars. A horn blared as a vehicle swerved to avoid them. Someone shouted something angry, but Sarah barely registered it. "We need to get off the street," Victoria said, still pulling her along. "We need to get somewhere public, somewhere with cameras and witnesses." They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah's lungs burned. Her legs felt like rubber. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. But the fear, the pure, primal fear of being hunted, kept her moving. Finally, Victoria pulled her into a large shopping mall. The contrast was jarring. The cool, climate-controlled air, the soft background music, the crowds of people shopping peacefully, unaware that a life-or-death chase was happening right in front of them. Victoria found a bathroom and pulled Sarah inside. They locked the door and stood there, both of them breathing heavily, both of them shaking. "What was that?" Sarah gasped. "Who were those men?" "James's people," Victoria said, leaning against the sink. "The people I warned you about. The people who make problems disappear." Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. Her hair had come loose from its ponytail and hung in disarray around her face. Her eyes were wild with fear. She looked like a different person, a hunted person. "We need to call the police," Sarah said. "No," Victoria said immediately. "We can't trust the police, not yet. Not until we know who James's connections are. For all we know, some of the police officers investigating this case could be on his payroll." "That's insane," Sarah said. "That's paranoid." "Is it?" Victoria asked. And there was something in her expression that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Think about it, Sarah. James has been running this operation for years. He's stolen millions of dollars. He's made people disappear. He's clearly part of a much larger organization. Do you really think he could do all of that without having people in positions of power? Without having police officers, judges, maybe even politicians on his side? Sarah wanted to argue. She wanted to insist that what Victoria was saying was impossible. But after everything that had happened in the past 24 hours, she wasn't sure what was possible anymore. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, and she was horrified to hear her voice crack. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I have a friend," she said. "Someone I trust. Someone who knows how to help people in situations like this. We're going to call him, and we're going to get out of the city." "Out of the city?" Sarah repeated. "For how long?" "For as long as it takes," Victoria said. "Until we can figure out who's really behind this. Until we can find Eleanor Hartwell. Until we can expose the entire operation and make sure that James and everyone who works with him goes to prison." Victoria dialed a number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Sarah held her breath. A man's voice answered. "Victoria, what's wrong? You only call this number in emergencies." "This is an emergency," Victoria said. "I need your help. I need you to get me and someone else out of the city. Now." There was a pause on the other end. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, the man said. "Where are you?" Victoria told him the address of the shopping mall. The man hung up without saying anything else. "Who was that?" Sarah asked. "Someone who used to work for James," Victoria said. "Someone who got out before things got too dark. Someone who's been helping me gather evidence against James for the past 6 months." "Why didn't you tell the police about him?" Sarah asked. "Because I wasn't sure who I could trust," Victoria said. "And because what he's been doing, gathering evidence, conducting his own investigation, might not be entirely legal. But he's good at what he does. And right now, we need someone who's good at staying hidden." They waited in the bathroom for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes. Sarah's fear gradually transformed into something else. Anger, fury. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and now she was being hunted. And for what? Because she'd had the misfortune of falling in love with the wrong man? No. She wasn't going to let this happen. She wasn't going to spend the rest of her life running and hiding. She was going to fight back. She was going to expose James and everyone who worked with him. She was going to make sure that Eleanor Hartwell was found. She was going to make sure that justice was served. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text. "I'm outside. Blue sedan in the parking garage, level 2. Come now." "That's him," Victoria said. "Let's go." They left the bathroom and made their way through the shopping mall, trying to look casual despite the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Sarah kept expecting to see the 2 men in dark suits around every corner. She kept expecting to feel a hand grab her shoulder. But they made it to the parking garage without incident. The blue sedan was parked in a corner spot, engine running. The driver's window rolled down, and Sarah saw a man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. "Get in," he said simply. They climbed into the back seat, and the man pulled out of the parking spot immediately. He drove carefully, obeying all traffic laws, not drawing any attention to himself. But Sarah could see in his eyes that he was alert, watching the other cars around them, checking the mirrors constantly. "I'm David," he said, his eyes meeting theirs in the rearview mirror. "Victoria and I have been working together for a while now. I know this is terrifying, but I want you to know that you're safe with me. I've been in situations like this before, and I know how to handle them." "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. To a safe house, David said. A place where James's people won't think to look for you. We'll lay low for a while, gather more evidence, and then we'll figure out our next move. As they drove through the city streets, Sarah watched the familiar landmarks of her life pass by. The coffee shop where she used to meet friends for lunch, the office building where she worked, the park where she used to go for morning runs. All of it suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. All of it suddenly felt like part of a life that no longer existed. "There's something you need to know," David said after they'd been driving for about 10 minutes. "Something that Victoria might not have told you yet." "What?" Sarah asked, though part of her wasn't sure she could handle any more revelations. "Eleanor Hartwell," David said. "We found her. Or rather, we found what's left of her." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, what's left of her?" "She's dead," David said quietly. "We found her body 3 weeks ago, buried in a shallow grave in the woods about 50 miles from the city. The police haven't found her yet because we haven't reported it. We've been waiting for the right moment, waiting for evidence that would conclusively tie James to her death." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "He really did kill her." "We think so," David said. "But we need proof. We need to be able to connect James to her death in a way that will hold up in court. And that's where you come in." "Me?" Sarah asked. "What can I possibly do?" "You can help us understand James's psychology," David said. "You can help us figure out what he might have said or done that could lead us to evidence of his guilt. And you can help us access places and people that Victoria and I can't access because we're already known to James's organization." Sarah realized what he was asking. He was asking her to go back, to pretend to be the grieving, confused bride, to get close to James, to try to extract information from him. "You're asking me to help you trap him," Sarah said. "I'm asking you to help us stop him," David corrected, "before he kills anyone else." Sarah realized that her nightmare had taken a new turn. She was no longer just a victim. She was becoming something else, something more dangerous. She was becoming a weapon. And the question was whether she had the strength and courage to wield that weapon without destroying herself in the process. As the blue sedan drove through the city streets toward an uncertain future, Sarah made a decision. She was going to do whatever it took to bring James down, no matter the cost, no matter the risk, because Eleanor Hartwell deserved justice, and so did she. So,